Hello, let me introduce myself for those who don't know me. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors of Park Church in Stoke in Shelton. I'm a husband of one wife, dad to 3 kids of my own, and we're also foster carers for another child as well. And these are tough times, aren't they, that we're living in at the moment, perhaps especially today if you are a single parent, or if you live on your own, or if you live in a flat somewhere without a garden. These are tough times, and in our family we're very blessed, very privileged to have a nice, decent sized garden. We've just got some chickens to help us through this, but we're all having to make adjustments, aren't we? And it struck me that this year, 2020, has been a year of absolutely massive upheaval. If you remember back to the beginning of the year, when everything we were talking about was Brexit, Brexit this, Brexit that, and that was completely then forgotten about when the fires in Australia happened and the floods happened in the UK. And of course, that's now been completely forgotten about and overtaken by the coronavirus. And at each stage, we've thought, how can the world get more chaotic than it is? And it has. And the question is, well, what are we meant to make of that? What should we do when our whole world seems to be crumbling all around us? What are we meant to do with that? How are we meant to respond? Well, in the Bible, when natural disasters occur, when things like this happen, it's very often portrayed as God shaking people up, as God shaking up nations and the whole world, and saying, wake up, you need to change your ways, you need to do things different. The writer, author, philosopher, I guess, C.S. Lewis, famously said this: God whispers to us in our pleasures, but shouts to us in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. In other words, when life is good, when life is easy, God whispers to us. We don't really listen to him. We don't feel we need to hear his voice. But when things go wrong, it's him calling out to us. You need to listen. You need to be roused from your sleep. That metaphor of people being asleep and need to be woken up is a common one in the Bible. It says somewhere else, "Wake up, O sleeper, and rise from the dead." And this idea of needing to be woken up, needing to be spiritually made alive, is a really common one throughout the Bible. And maybe today, I don't know why you're watching this video. Maybe you're part of our church. Maybe you've been sent this by a family member or a relative or someone like that, a work colleague. Well, maybe today you're not a believer and just thinking, well, this just sounds like a bunch of religious mumbo jumbo to me. This talk of rising from the dead, being shaken and woken up. Well, dead people don't rise. Death is death. When you're dead, that's it. Well, many people in ancient Corinth thought the same. It turns out that people haven't really changed very much over the years, and then you can read it in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 35. Some of them mockingly asked this, how are the dead raised? How are the dead raised? With what kind of bodies will they come? In other words, this is all just crazy. There are too many difficulties, too many problems to think through. How can you believe that? Like, come on, it's ridiculous. Dead people don't rise. Well, I want to suggest to you today that we shouldn't dismiss the idea of resurrection too quickly. The Apostle Paul, in his letter that I've just quoted, his response, first of all, is to say that attitude is just foolishness. And you think, ooh, that's a bit harsh, isn't it? Well, he tends to speak his mind. And his reasoning behind that is he uses this extended metaphor of seeds. And he says, just look at a seed, you know, it looks dead. There's nothing about it that would suggest that life is going to spring from this seed. It's just a little brown, shriveled bit of dirt. And yet, all over the place, all over your garden if you've got one, all over your park if you haven't, then life is springing up from little dead things, you know, and 10,000 times a minute this is happening all around us all the time. That life is coming from something which looks completely dead. So I guess a previous generation would have called that a miracle. Today we might say it is just astounding. You know, if you understand some of the science behind it, and none of us understands all the science behind it, but if you understand some of the science behind it, then you have to say, well, this is absolutely astounding that life comes from this tiny little seed. And the point is that if life can come out of something which looks completely dead in the right conditions, then it happens all the time, everywhere, and our whole existence depends on that concept. Then it's pretty rash to say it never happens with human beings. So I'd say to you today, don't dismiss the idea of resurrection just because you don't understand it. That would be like dismissing the idea of seeds working just because you don't understand them. Well, okay, you might say, well, okay, it might be foolish to dismiss the idea completely, but that's a very long way from being convinced. Well, that's fair enough, isn't it? Yeah, that's fair enough. This side of the grave, our knowledge is very limited. You know, we can't peer beyond death and see what lies beyond. We just can't do that. We don't have the ability to do that. But what if there was someone who had died and who had rose again from the dead? What if there was someone who had demonstrated power over death? What if there was someone who had peered over the other side and had come back to tell us all about it? That person would be worth listening to, wouldn't they? And of course, you know who I'm talking about. We've just had Easter weekend. I'm talking about Jesus, of course. One of my favourite stories in the whole Bible is found in John chapter 11. It's the story of Lazarus. And I really encourage you to read it after you've watched this video. Just read the story of Lazarus from John chapter 11. It's a really great story. And what happens is this man Lazarus, who's a friend of Jesus, had died, and his sister Martha comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, if you had been here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. Which is quite a big statement in itself, isn't it? But she believed that was true. You know, Jesus has the power to heal people. You know, if you had been here, Jesus, he wouldn't have died. And Jesus says he will rise again. And Martha says, yeah, I know that he's going to rise again. On the last day, at the resurrection, he will rise again. And Jesus says something very interesting. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. In other words, I have the power over life and death and resurrection. If you want to be safe as you cross over, if you want to be safe, you need me, you need to be with me. I am the resurrection and the life. And then Jesus, because anyone can say that, can't they? But then Jesus proves that what he's just said is true by calling out to Lazarus in a graveyard a bit like this one. Jesus calls out, Lazarus, come out. and this man who's been dead for 4 days and is actually pretty smelly, stumbles out of this grave, still wrapped up in burial cloths. And it's a really, obviously, very dramatic scene, one of my favourites in the whole Bible. And the point is that Jesus has the power. He demonstrates himself that he has the power over life and death. And today, I really just have a very simple message to everyone watching this, and that is that this is a great opportunity. In fact, it's more than an opportunity. I believe these times are times when God is shaking us, when God is calling out to us to pursue him. You know, the Bible says that when we die, we face judgment, and judgment without Jesus on your side, judgment without forgiveness, is a very scary prospect. To stand before a perfectly holy God with all the rubbish, all the baggage of your life, really? You want to do that on your own? Jesus offers forgiveness and peace with God and a new start through his death on the cross. He offers that to everybody watching this today. Doesn't matter what you've done, who you are, what you've thought or said or anything like that. You can have a fresh start with Jesus today. And I just want to encourage you in these days of shaking, that to see this as God shaking each one of us and saying, you need to wake up out of your complacency and pursue me. Pursue the forgiveness and the restoration that Jesus offers, because he alone has power over life and death and resurrection. May God bless you, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.